Welcome to Rethinking Europe, the European Integration Group's podcast series where we explore. I'm Aybars Öztuna, Global Partnerships and Fundraising Lead at the European Integration Group. In this series, we bring together policymakers, political thinkers, and emerging leaders from different regions to critically reflect on Europe, the transatlantic relationship, and the future of global governance. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Tomas Casaretto, a close friend and a promising young political figure from Uruguay. Tomas is an active member of the Juventud del Partido Nacional, one of Latin America's most institutionally rooted political traditions, and represents a new generation of leaders engaging with questions of democracy, sovereignty, and international cooperation from a Latin American perspective. In this episode, we will move beyond conventional Eurocentric debates and engage in a transatlantic conversation, rethinking Europe through the lens of Latin America. We will discuss Europe's strategic autonomy, the future of the transatlantic alliance, the place of regions like the Southern Cone in an increasingly multipolar world, and how young political actors are navigating global uncertainty. Tomas, it is a pleasure to have you with us today.
How are you, my friend? Really pleased to be here, and just wanted to also say to all the audience and to you, it's something really good what you're doing with this podcast. So thank you again.
Thank you, Tomas. So let me just dive in with the first question. You are active in the Juventud del Partido Nacional in Uruguay, a political tradition. And so it's based on Republican values and Atlanticism. And
Yeah.
how has your personal political formation shaped the way you understand democracy, sovereignty, and international cooperation today?
Well, first, you have to know that Uruguay with Chile are the two most democratic, republican, institutionalized countries in South America. It is something that has taken many decades. We are almost bicentenary countries, 200 years more or less. And why is it different from other countries in the continent? Because we see quite a gap between Uruguay and Argentina, Uruguay and Brazil in terms of democratic openness and the work of institutions and the republican tools. And I, in my opinion, think it's because we have a really strong partisan system. Our oldest political parties have almost 200 years. The two foundational parties are this year becoming 190 years of. It's quite a lot. And the party that is now in government, that is in power, is a new left-wing party, but it has almost 60 years. So in comparison to the political parties of many other parts of the world, but also in Latin America, it's like a long time to be in politics and to stay as a political party. And that conservativeness, in a way, is a little bit conservative, but it shows how stable is the system in terms of democracy, in terms of institutions. We tend to be a kind of political system that even in different aisles of some idea, we tend to go to the middle, to, in difficult moments, share different opinions to see what's the path through a crisis. For example, in 2002, like 24 years ago, we faced the worst economic crisis our country has ever seen. And the president was never in question of if he should or not should continue to be president. There was a way of saying, okay, we have to help this go through the parties that were in the coalition government and the parties that were in the opposition. And that's something that goes on in time, no matter who governs. So that's, I think, the essence of what we represent in my country.
Young political leaders across Latin America face a tension between ideological inheritance and systematic disruption. What do you see as the defining political challenge for your generation in Uruguay, and how does it differ from the challenges faced by previous political generations?
That's a really good question because there is a really interesting tension between ideological inheritance and systematic disruption. And perhaps Uruguay is more accustomed to an ideological inheritance because we don't tend to have fast changes, or we're not so comfortable with disruption. We like things to be more like quiet, going time to time, gradual change. It's not always good, but it many times assures you going through a more safe path. And I can give you an example, leaving aside if it's beneficial or not for a country or even for the continent. But we have the other way of thinking in Argentina. They are much more disruptive. They are much more radical to the left or to the right. The center is not so generalized. I mean, there you have a big gap between what's left and what's right. What I'm trying to say is it's a challenge because we see now in many parts of the world how the middle is getting lower and the other aisles are like more hard, more strong, more populous. And I am of the idea that sometimes when you go so left or so right, when you go so disruptive in the long term, it only leads to separation, to divisiveness. And sometimes you should look for a way to challenge facts, to challenge times, but in a way that doesn't leave us one thinking is the good guy and the other is our enemy.
I see. Europe often presents itself as a normative power, yet struggles to act as a unified strategic one. In your view, is the European Union moving towards strategic autonomy, or is it structurally destined to remain dependent on transatlantic guarantees?
Well, if I may, I insist in a way, and in my humble opinion, the question turns or tries to lead the fact that Europe is too much exposed and related to the US in some ways. But sometimes Europe, and I think it's part of the problem they are now having in Ukraine and some other facts, but especially in Ukraine, they tend to forget that they are also exposed and related to Russia. And it happened, for example, when these biggest cold times you had in Europe, that you needed energy and things to warm up, and you needed the resources of Russia. And in this context of the war of Ukraine, ended up being like in a really tough spot because the US wasn't so eager to help you. You were having real issues in Ukraine and in that part of the continent. And also you needed the help of the other partner that you were not in war, but in not really good terms. So the question is, how independent is now Europe from the rest of the world and how autosufficient it is? Because even some countries are more autosufficient than others because of this conflict that you have in Ukraine and the relationship within the European Union. It pushes countries to help these ones in despair. And for example, it tends to say, okay, I am putting money in tanks to Ukraine, but I have my own issues in my country. So it makes a local crisis a European crisis, sometimes being so related and so restrained by the European Union that in some moments has its good things. It also leads to this kind of problems. Because if you were also, I insist, in a humble opinion, if you were more efficient in the way you're relating in the European Union, this wouldn't be happening. You see the tensions between the countries because they're saying, okay, I need to help, but I'm not going to do so profound because I have my own issues in my country. But in the same way, the other countries do the same. So at the end of the bargain, this conflict is going for 4 years. There hasn't been a strong response from the European Union. The last time we were both in Germany, in Berlin,
Right.
that was part of the issue. I remember a meeting with German PMs.
Yes. Yes,
about
yes.
how there was a restraint, a discussion in the parliament in the financiation of more arms to give to Ukraine, and the government was the left. It wasn't Olaf, and it was like a discussion, also thinking of the problems you have inside. So you have to balance between wanting to help Ukraine and the European Union, but helping your own. So this is strained the relation not just with the US but with the rest of the world, and it's happening now with this UA Mercosur agreement that perhaps you are now like trying to watch a little bit more with Latin America because you need us. We also need you, but perhaps in this moment, as in the way the world it is, it's difficult for you to find trustful partners. And you know that, for example, with Uruguay and with Chile, whoever is in government, left or right, you always have someone you can rely on. If you see Chile, for example, now Jose Antonio Cast won the presidency. He is right, but his predecessor, the actual president of Chile, Boric, is from left. The one that came before Boric was Peña, right? The one before Peña was Bachelet, left. Before Bachelet was Peña again, right? And before him left Bachelet. So they are like from one to other, always maintaining stability.
So as competition intensifies between the US and China, Europe finds itself navigating economic interdependence and security alignment. Do you believe Europe can realistically maintain strategic ambiguity, or will it be forced into clearer geopolitical alignment? Perhaps this is more of a outlook question for the coming years as well.
Well, you see, a big part of being autosufficient and independent starts with being energetically independent, because it's what helps you to go to it helps the country to run off business, houses, buildings, schools, I mean hospitals, the connection in trains. That energetic independence has two sides. The one of this that I was saying, and the other is for cars, for buses, for railways. Uruguay has the first one. We have an electrical, energetic, independence, and with renewable resources. 98% of our energy is made by sun, by wind, or by water. So in that way, we are independent. What happens? We do not produce oil, so we have to buy, and we are restrained to the international prices and the international crisis. What's light in the end of the tunnel that might help Uruguay to be more independent? That now it's time to time, month to month, and year to year, being more in our market, more electrical cars. So that helps you in that way. Then you have the other part is really important, is the economic one. And we have I wouldn't say it's an issue, but a fact. And the fact is that China is outspending the US. They are people who have many money in their pockets. They want to invest. They are investing a lot in Africa, in South America, more than it is known. And the US now enters in a new stage of how to relate with other countries. And what does that mean? That perhaps the United States, these last, let's say, 45 years, more or less, for 50 years, has been looking other ways, but not South America and not in Africa. And now they see that is a problem, because they have let China spread many countries in many continents. But that policy has changed, and the first surprising, I guess, way of showing their politics towards Latin America has changed is what happened in Venezuela with Maduro,
Right.
and the oil, and how they now Petro it's going to meet. We should investigate this, but how many times a Latin American president has met with a US president as Trump? Trump met with Lula, met with Milei almost 4 or 5 times in this short period of time. He met Maria Corina Machado. He's talking with Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. Now he's saying about meeting President Petro. He's talking about Cuba. He has. I mean, that shows a shift in American politics. And also, we are seeing more concerned but implicated North America in world matters. Trump has gotten into African wars. Trump is talking about South America. Trump is talking about Greenland. He's talking about Mexico. He's talking about Ukraine and Russia. He meets with China. He had met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. I mean, it's something leader, North Korean dictator. But what I'm trying to say, in that, we're in a new era because China had been for almost 15 years, like going forward, being part of world matters, and now we see that the US is like trying to take control again.
So you mentioned this shift, and do you see this shift also applies to the Europe-Latin America relations in terms of the, because it's like Europe-Latin America relations often lack strategic depth, but you mentioned the America, United States of America's reach and strategic shift has become distant point now. So what structural or political factors prevent this relationship from evolving beyond rhetoric? And what would a genuine strategic partnership look like?
Europe, for many years now, hasn't thought about South America as a trustful, efficient partner, because I guess it was the thought that you didn't need us, that the relationship was more beneficial for South America than for Europe. But you also maintained a cultural, more close relation, not so public perhaps, but in reality you did with Africa because of colonialism till the end of last century, but also because of investments, because of some territories still being of Europe. And with the US, you related as you always did since First World War. But as we enter this 21st century, perhaps in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, the problem is that the relation with Latin America was colder than usual. The relationship with Africa had been disbalanced because the benefit was more for Africa than for Europe. The migration took out of control, and that is something that's really bad for Europe. And with this, I am not saying that immigration is something bad and it shouldn't be regulated in a way. I'm saying sometimes when you open your doors so openly and you are not prepared for that, it turns out the wrong way. And what shifted is more aggressive Putin in Russia. It started with Crimea, but it was like going in a greater way as years go by. And now a different relation with the US, with a president that is cutting off all the ties he can. So Europe looks forward, looks in many ways and says, whoa, we are alone with a migration crisis, with a war in Ukraine that is of all Europe. And I think the fact that we have signed this treaty after decades of being talked, and with the negation, I don't know if it's a word, but it is not so well seen by France and other countries, but particularly France, is because it might be strong what I'm going to say, but I think Europe is afraid that this is not looking good, that we have 2 more years of Trump at least, perhaps 6, that Russia is not going to end this war, that Ukraine is bleeding the resources of Europe, and that this is perhaps they thought this was going to be something shorter, and now they are starting to see there is something in a long term, that perhaps America doesn't shift to be so amicable again, and that perhaps Russia maintains its aggressiveness. So Europe needs trustful partners.
Where Paraguay and the Southern Command broadly are often viewed as a peripheral in global geopolitics, do you see this peripherality as a constraint or as a strategic flexibility in a multipolar world increasingly shaped by non-aligned actors?
Lord Palmerston said that you don't have permanent friends or permanent enemies. Luis Alberto Herrera, who is a politician of another year in Uruguay, really respected from my party, he was voted president and so on. He said, "We are not people of any country or of many countries. We are of one that is ours." So I think it's to be pragmatic, to know, and you have to give it to the guy. Trump is pragmatic. He knows when he can, when he can't, how to make it. Until what point go. Let's hope he doesn't cross it ever. But he's a pragmatic guy. He criticized Petro, but now he's meeting and so on.
The EU-Mercosur agreement has become a symbol of both ambition and paralysis. From your perspective, is this impasse primarily about environmental norms, domestic politics, or deeper structural mistrust between regions?
I don't think there is mistrust between regions. I think that there is trust, and perhaps that's why, although they had been passing many decades, they were still talking. I mean, when a president is invested in Uruguay, it always comes the king of Spain. And that's something because there are cultural roots. It happens with almost all the countries in Latin America. So, I mean, it's like a little colonial, what I'm saying, but it's part of the culture of our country. What I'm trying to say, perhaps trust is the only fact that remained in the discussions. The problem might be, environmental norms, but mostly that some countries were affected with this agreement because of what they produce, particularly France, particularly Ukraine. When we were talking before, I told you that I thought that Europe was afraid of what was going on and what's coming. Mm-hmm. And as they see it in a long term, Ukraine is one of the biggest producers of food in the world. Now it's not producing, so they need another markets to buy because it's not working out. So I think that was really the issue.
Europe and Latin America are simultaneously confronting democratic fatigue, polarization, and institutional distrust. Are these crises manifestations of a shared global phenomenon, or do they stem from fundamentally different political pathologies?
No, I guess this is a global phenomenon. We see it in the US, we see it in Mexico. We are in a strange moment. Perhaps we are in the shift of an era, or perhaps it has already started and we are not seeing it because it's too close to us. But you see we're entering something new. Whether it is good or not, I really don't know. Time will tell.
Last question for you, Thomas. Looking ahead to 2035, do you envision Europe as a consolidated geopolitical actor, a fragmented regulatory power, or something entirely different? And what role, if should Latin American democracies aspire to play in shaping that future global order?
Latin America, if Europe wants, it's going to be a trustful partner, something you can work with whoever is in power. Besides that, Europe is in a turning point. It's in a struggle, difficult to end, difficult to decide, but mostly difficult to face, because this relationship towards the US is going to try them to see how they want. It's going to test the European Union and NATO, but especially European Union, how they can co-participate or they can't, because this ends with a stronger European Union and a stronger Europe, or a more fragmented Europe and a fragmented UA. Because it seems to me that NATO is in the last of its partnership, at least if this continues to go on in the way it's going. If Trump leaves office, if Trump is not reelected, perhaps there's a way of saving NATO. But as this goes by, it's not so clear to anyone.
Thank you for being with us, Thomas, and thank you for sharing your perspective. It was great, and hopefully looking forward to seeing you in near future, face to face as well. And greetings to Paraguay. So bye now.
Bye, my friend. Thank you for this time, and hope to see you soon.